So you have the four themes, one of which I think is most prominent, but you can have all of them at different times. But like I said, my competence, which I certainly have, but it seems to me as I've thought about it, is in the service of the acceptance theme for me. So that's how these work. The least one for me, by the way, I think is control. I'm not much of a control guy. In fact, in many ways, I'd rather be the number two. I'd rather support a strong leader than myself take the lead. As I look at these, the control one does not tend to bubble up for me so much. And I'll yield the field pretty quickly if somebody, is strong and wants to take that. Now let's think for a minute about what I call the postures that conflict takes. The reason I put this in here is that people tend to identify one or two of these as red zone, but then miss one or two of them as being red zone. So I want you to be aware of it as people are starting to become red zone, what posture they may default into, okay? The first of them is a placating posture. Oh, am I using too much of your time right now? Oh, did I say too much just then? Gosh, I'm really sorry. Kind of a posture where the person is trying to make nice and trying to smooth over what might be the conflict. That should alert you to the fact that they've gone red zone and that whatever's going on between you and that person now has become very personal to that person, and that person's story has been activated. But they will become very, very placating. And these postures probably are some pieces probably genetic, and some pieces what they've learned in their childhood, that this is how you handle this kind of a situation. So it's behaviors that now are expressing the red zone to you. The first of which is this placating posture. The second one is what I call blaming. The blaming is the one that looks most red zone to people, because it does look like the person is red zone. They are emotional, they're red in the face, they're accusing you of all kinds of malfeasance, they're upset, they're cussing possibly, whatever they're doing. But you probably in those will think, I think this person's red zone now. I think they're way too upset given the nature of this conflict we're having, like the resource allocation I've been talking about. Should we give money to the youth or should we give it to the older folks? And the person's red in the face and really upset and blaming you of trying to take over the vestry, and I know you're the most controlling person and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. The blamer does look the most like red zone. So it's the easiest one to detect, if you will. The next one is the hardest to detect. And that is this one I call computer, where a person is Mr. Spock and telling you, okay, now I want to tell you the facts. So I've looked over the facts here of our community, and I've noticed that the demographics are such that there's more old folks here, and blah, 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 blah. And they will completely bury you in data and information a lot of times. But often, and by the way, I'm not saying that a person who is doing that is always red zone, but often they are, that it's personalized, but their behaviors around this red zone, this personal story that's come up is very computer-like. And often what they'll do, remember the conflict goes on too long, they'll just keep burying you in statistics, even though we're talking about the vestry here. The vestry's moved on and made and really coming to a clear point of decision. They're still burying everybody in facts and verbiage, if you will. That would say to me, okay, I think this person's red zone. But there's no emotion particularly that's visible. I think there's a lot of anxiety, but they're like a duck. They're very calm on the surface. They're paddling like crazy underneath because there's a sense, let's say they're into control and they feel like, gee, the control of this meeting right now is slipping from me. So they'll continue computer-like to just generate, well, let's say, statistics or data or examples of some sort or other. Okay, so that's the third one. The last one is one I call distracting. It's my favorite, actually. Distracting, when you go red zone, is somebody will start telling jokes or take the conversation off in a totally different direction or whatnot. And again, this is a little harder to determine. The blaming is the easiest. I think then placating is the second best. Distracting is the third best one to determine. But it's a person who will distract. So let's say the conflict is going on the vestry between resource allocation and another member on the vestry says, hey, do you mind if we take a break here, or can we do this, or tells a joke, or maybe one of the people who's in the conflict starts doing that, and joking around about it, and it seems inappropriate, or it's certainly not value add to the conversation that's going on right now. So they are using distraction. So all of these postures are basically behaviors. I think they're basically learned in childhood as to how you manage the anxiety that you're experiencing when you go red zone. Because what tapping into your story is doing is tapping into a reservoir of anxiety. That's critical to understand, okay? Now let's talk about, we've talked about a lot about the red zone. Let's talk a little bit more about the blue zone. I've put in your notes there, and you're going to have to expand it because of the time that I have here. But let's talk some about the blue zone and what that looks like. First of all, the blue zone, building on what we've already said, a blue zone person is a very self-aware person, a person who's well-defined. A person who probably knows their bent in life and knows where their talents lie and their giftedness lies, and that he or she lives into that giftedness a lot. And in the midst of conflict, they can be the non-anxious presence. Not the computer. The computer actually, who's red zone, I think, remember the computer posture, looks like they're a non-anxious presence because the anxiety is not on the surface. But they are just as anxious as everybody else, the blamer, let's say, or the placater. Their anxiety is much more masked, if you will. But the truly well-defined person who is blue zone is somebody who is a non-anxious presence because why? Their focus is on the mission. The mission itself is not creating anxiety for them, okay? They are saying, I need to move this organization forward according to what God has said and according to what our leadership has agreed on is our vision and where we want to end up in the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years, whatever kind of thing. And so what we're doing here is just talking about what the vision is, and we're talking about the youth and the older folks. But let's look at that in relation to what we have said our priorities are. By the way, visioning sets priority, obviously. That's what it does. So what it does say that when somebody walks into your office and says, listen, I've come up with a great idea, a car wash for Jesus on Saturday morning. You can take out your pair of glasses, which is your mission and vision and strategy, and look at it and say, hey, that's a great idea. It just doesn't square with where we're going. And the same thing with this resource allocation discussion. See, in other words, the mission and the vision should be of great help to you in these kinds of things. It's not you, it's what the collective have heard God say is this is where our church should be going. So when we have this discussion, the blue zone person who's not allowing their own personal story to distort the discussion and the conflict is able to say, let's turn back to what we've said we're going. And then let's look at our priorities and our allocations according to that. Not according to the fact that you want money, for older folks and you want money for youth. That needs to be in the light of and focused by our pair of glasses, which says this is where we see ourselves going. That's what the Blue Zone person is always doing. They're always pulling the conversation back to the mission. That's what Blue Zone does, okay? But to be able to be Blue Zone, you've got to be quite self-aware again. Be best if you were living more intentionally in your intentional difference, your bent, as I've called it, so that your own personal life is aligned, okay? And that you're aware of then these competing values that are taking place in front of you, so that you then, as the non-anxious presence, can begin to point out what's actually occurring there. This is what we call the transformational leader, by the way. The transformational leader, in a nutshell, is somebody, a man or a woman, who is well-defined, non-anxious, who's Blue Zone, who can monitor their red zone and keep those voices quiet so that their story doesn't continually contaminate the discussion. And the first thing that these people do is get on the balcony, as we say. And when you get on let's say you're on a dance floor and you're dancing with your partner, you're basically only aware of the people right around you. But if you get on a balcony, I don't know if you've ever done this at a dance, but if you get on a balcony and look over a dance floor, you'll see all the patterns emerge. I mean, it may look kind of random to you, but it's really not. Even though the people don't know each other and they've not been choreographed, people will move not just with their partner, but in relation to people around them in certain ways. And if you're on the balcony, you can do it. Now, if you're on the balcony, taking that metaphor to what we're talking about here, if you're non-anxious and Blue Zone, you can get on the balcony and you can see actually what's occurring and then place that before people. Listen, folks, you have two good ideas here. John, you on the left here, you really think that youth allocation is the way to go. Jim, you're over here, and you really think that senior allocation is the best way to go. What that's creating, though, here is a discrepancy in resource allocation, and I think it may be best at this point if we all take a deep breath and if we take a big step back and let's spread before us what is our mission, what is our vision, and what are the strategies and the priorities that we've established, and let's look at this discussion in that light. That's what a Blue Zone person can do. Okay, they're on the balcony, they're seeing how the discussion's evolving, and they can see the competing values. Now they can place that before the people so that the discussion focuses then where it needs to focus. Instead of whether Jim's acceptable over here, or whether John's competent, or whether she's going to survive, or whatever all's there. And however their postures are, one's blaming the other one, and one's being a computer and throwing facts all over the table, and another person's placating, now let's make nice, everybody, or distracting and telling jokes. This person can actually put the proposition out there. Why? Because they're not anxious. Their story is not contaminating the situation. In lieu of that, by the way, what you will find is vestry meetings, nonprofit boards, marriages, name whatever organization you want, will devolve into red zone conflict, which accelerates, has no end in sight. Why? Because I frankly cannot solve your survival issue. I cannot solve the sense that you need to feel competent and don't feel competent right now, because we are not going in the direction that your idea would lead us. I can't resolve that. That can't be resolved. But we can resolve how we're going to allocate resources according to what we have said God has told us that this is the direction this church needs to be going in. Now we can resolve it. But I can't if I'm arguing with you about whether you're acceptable or not. Not that I would say that, by the way. What I just said to you, the transformational leader, by the way, if you're just pointing up the person, gee, I think that you're red zone in this and you're only, you're contaminated with your personal story, they will probably redouble their efforts to kill you. So be aware of that. That's not a good, effective strategy for dealing with it. The effective strategy is being blue zone and non-anxious is to bring people back to the mission. Always bring them back to the mission, okay? And not that if somebody's very red zone and very into this, not that that's an easy task, but it is the task that needs to happen if you want to do this, okay? And again, if somebody's disrupting your meeting and getting very red zone-y, again, the best trump card you always have is the mission. And by the way, do not yourself as the leader, or the minister in this case, get into a one-to-one argument with a red zone person. What you want is to mobilize the collective around you. In this case, that my example is the vestry. You want everybody mobilized around that. So I would say something, let's say John is accusing me of, okay, Pastor, you're trying to control this situation, and I know what you want, and blah, 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 because you have teenagers, and you want the youth money, and blah, all this kind of stuff. I would say something like this: well, John, you may have a good point. Let's take that to the vestry, and let's put the mission on the table, okay? And because you're right, I mean, we will default to self-interest if we're not careful, and I do have teenagers, and I certainly want a robust youth ministry here. But my need for the youth ministry, your need for the old folks, needs to take a back seat to what we have heard God say to us as to where we're going in the next 5 years, okay? And what do you all think, everybody? Let them. In other words, the transformational leader tends to be more of a facilitator than they are the strong, we're going this way, so shut up and follow me. That's the leader that brings about groupthink, actually. The transformational leader constantly is on the balcony expressing to the people what's going on and where the competing values are, and then facilitating the discussion around the mission so that we can, like in this case of resource allocation, can make informed decisions where there is conflict that makes sense.